faith, family, future. We building big. Welcome to the Beauty and Building Podcast. Yeah. We go up when we steppin', yeah, we rise again. Turn the pressure into power.
Hi everybody, my name is Lakresha and welcome to the Beauty and Building Podcast. This is a special episode for me because it's just me this time. No guests, no audience, just us. So this episode, I'm going to introduce myself, tell you guys a little bit about why I started the podcast, some of the different things that I do on a day-to-day basis, and then just kind of give you an insight into my life, some of the different things that molded me into the person who I am, some of the challenges that I've faced, how I've overcome them. I'm going to share some of my faith walk and just have a conversation specifically between me and you. So this is a very intimate moment for us, and I'm super excited for you to be here. So my journey for everything really started out with where I was born, who I grew up with, where I grew up, and then who I became as what you guys see as the mom, the CEO, the wife. But in between all of those layers, God was building me. And one of the main focuses of this episode is really just having the time to take and reflect on how much God has helped grow me in my life, how I've been able to overcome so many different obstacles, whether that be in becoming a woman, becoming a mother, opening up businesses, closing businesses, failing, succeeding when it felt like failure that felt like successes, and everything in between, and just knowing that there's beauty in all of that. And I'm really excited to share my story with you guys. So here we are. So who I am at my core, beyond the titles and the business, is really a child of God. I always knew that God loved me, but I couldn't really put it in words. When I was first born, my parents were together. My dad was a DC police detective when I was born, so he was well into his career, and he already had a lot of who he was becoming established. But my mom was really young, and she was a college student. They met while she was in college. They had me, and then shortly after they got married. But their marriage was short-lived, so I am their only child. And so I pretty much was my grandparents' baby, because my mom was still trying to figure out her career. My dad was full-blown in his career. And my grandparents were the stable ones. So I was raised mainly by my mother's mother. I stayed with her for a majority of my young childhood. And it really shaped who I was, because I had a praying grandmother. So she prayed about everything. If something wasn't going right, we prayed about it. If something was going right, we prayed about it. We went to church every Sunday. We cook Sunday meals. She was just a powerhouse, and she really helped develop who I was at my core. But I also had my dad's mom, because when my parents broke up, my dad and my mom had a custody agreement, so I had to go with my dad on the weekends. And so I would go and visit my dad's mom, and she was a powerhouse all in herself, but kind of different than my mother's mother. My mother's mother was more of a Southern belle, very much street smart. She knew everybody. She was always outside and talking to different people. But my father's mother was different. She was an Eastern Star, and she was always attending meetings, always doing like community outreach. She was always put together. So when you saw her from head to toe, dressed, fly, like she drove a Mercedes Benz. And so I had kind of had like two different examples of what it was to be a praying grandmother. Like I had two praying grandmothers that were around me. And so they really instilled hard work in me, and like their thought process on family was very much like you show up for your family, you take care of your family, you don't, let your family down. And so that really created a sense of who I became as a woman, because as soon as I had my kids, I knew that they were dependent on me. And it really like helped to shape my core values. So I will say that my core values really came from my grandmothers. They both are from the South. Both my grandmothers were raised in North Carolina, moved to Washington, D.C. during the Civil Rights era. My mother's mother was a civil rights activist, so she marched with Martin Luther King. She did a lot of work with Marion Barry when he became mayor. So she was always out in the community doing community projects. And then, like I said, my father's mother was an Eastern Star, so her organization took her all across the country doing community projects, setting up scholarships, working with the youth in their community, working with her church. And so I saw that and I was like, gosh, like, I just thought it was normal. I thought it was like almost what everybody's grandmother did. And it wasn't until my mother and my father kind of started like getting themselves together and they bought their houses that when I was away from my grandmother's and I realized how many other people were growing up without those core values. But those things really like stuck with me, and I learned how to pray for my grandmothers. So what I would see is that whenever they were having challenges, the first thing they would do was go to God. Like they didn't go to gossip to their friends, or during that time there wasn't an internet, so there wasn't any blogs they can go read. They just literally had their Bibles. And when I became an adult, I remembered that. I remembered that if you prayed about it and you put in the work behind it, that's when you actually saw results. So at the core of who I am, I feel like I'm one of God's favorite people, because just throughout my life, I've just seen so many blessings, and I've been able to walk through so many doors that if God hadn't put me there, I wouldn't be. So having both my grandmothers in my life was a blessing for me, because one of the things that happened as my parents, got their footing and started like, getting their lives together was they both remarried. So I went from being the only child to being one of 9. So I have 8 siblings between my mom's family and my dad's family. And a lot of times I felt like the black sheep, because my mom and her husband, they had like their kids and their household, and then my dad and his wife had their kids and their household. But when I was with my grandmothers, I was like their baby. Like I was never split between 2 households when it came to them. And so it gave me a sense of like it made me special, and I really didn't understand it then. Like at first I was like angry and I didn't really know why, and that was a struggle for me growing up, especially when it came to my teenage years, because my mom's grandma died when I was turning 12, and I had lived with her and went to school from her house, and she was like my main care provider until I was basically a teenager. And then my whole life shifted. So I went from living in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Northeast D.C. in a very like, urban city environment to both my parents having houses in Southern Maryland. And the shift was very hard for me. And because my parents not only had me, but by then they had also had like their other children that they had and their stepchildren that they had like brought into our family. I just felt like I kind of fell through the cracks in a sense where they knew of me, but I really feel like they didn't know me. So a lot of my struggles began in my personal life when I was a teenager when my grandmother died, because I really didn't have anybody to pray with me anymore, like on a consistent basis. Like she was the one, like if I cried, she would hold me. Or if something was wrong, like I could be like, Grandma, this is what's going on. And she would like help talk me through it. And so I had to kind of learn how to do some of that stuff on my own. And so when I became a teenager, my parents thought I was just being rebellious. Like they just thought I had lost my mind because I didn't feel like they knew who I was. I didn't feel like they were like feeding my creative side. When I was in elementary school, my grandmother had me in talent shows, and I was a dancer and I was a singer and I did plays. And when she passed away, like my mom dealing like looking back now, she was just dealing with her own grief and like trying to figure out her life. So I don't necessarily blame her, but she didn't really know how to like feed the artistic side of me. Because both my parents are they both are police officers. So while my mom was finding out what she wanted to do, she ended up becoming a police officer. So I had two parents who ended up being police officers, and they're very linear minded, and I'm a very like open minded, like whichever the way the wind blows type person. And so we clashed a lot because I wanted to do my hair pink and I wanted to put on two different color shoes, and my mom wanted me to be like perfectly matched. And so we just started clashing. And so I think growing up, getting through those challenges, what I had to really do was kind of like start looking inside myself and pulling some of those deep core values back to the surface, that at one point in time I thought I lost. So having my grandmothers in my life definitely gave me a grounding that I needed and a springboard to like push me forward into who I am today. I have to give so much gratitude to them as like strong women for that. And I don't know if like even my family really realizes how important it was, like how much they poured into me, because I was their only grandchild for so long. So they just were able to like sit down and have breakfast with me. And I remember even at my dad's mother's house, like she made coffee every morning. Until this day, I drink coffee every single day. And I know that's just one of those things that I picked up from her. And that I started like becoming the woman that I am because of them. So many moments that I felt lost, but more recently, starting out my business during COVID was one of those moments where it was like the land of the unknown, because we didn't know what the world was going to look like afterwards. And the world that we had before kind of shifted. And so we were kind of in a gray area. And rest in peace to my grandma, Sadie. She recently passed away this year, shortly before this episode. But I remember calling her and saying like, Grandma, I want to open up a salon, but I'm scared. And I just remember her saying, God didn't give you the spirit of fear. So I need you to like dig deep, and you're so smart and I know you can do it. And she was like, I'm so proud of you, because even when like things go bad, like you will still try to push forward. But a moment when I was younger that I felt lost was right after, like I said, right after my my mother's mother passed away. So I was 12 and I changed schools. And I went to the same elementary school until I was in the 5th grade. So I knew all my friends, I knew my neighborhood. Um, and I got taken from the city and moved into the suburbs. And I was used to coming home to my grandmother being home every day to like being a latchkey kid. And I really didn't know what to do as a latchkey kid because I never had to be by myself. So I started going outside and seeking friends, and I realized that the children in the suburbs were different than the kids that I grew up with in the city. The first thing I noticed about them is that they all kind of like hung out in their houses. And in DC in the 90s, we were outside. So we woke up and we went to school, and we came home from school, and then we went back outside, and we had to be home by the time the street lights came on. Like, those were the rules. And we knew the radius that we can go on. So, I could leave the house, go get on the bus, go to the rec center, go to the pool. As long as my grandmother knew where I was going, I pretty much had like free range. And in the suburbs, it wasn't any of that. It was just like my neighborhood and houses. So started making some friends, but it still just felt so foreign, and I felt like an outsider. And not because like I didn't have the things that my friends had, but I could just tell that like everybody was being raised different. They didn't have the same values. Like, nobody gave hugs. And I just didn't understand that. I was like, y'all don't like go to the rec center and like hang out and like, just have fun and play basketball and give hugs. And so that was definitely a moment where I felt very lost. But my personality did not allow me to kind of stay in that place for long. I met my best friend shortly after I moved out here. And it was probably about 2 years before I met her. So from 6th grade to 8th grade, I really didn't have any friends. And that was hard for me because everybody in my neighborhood knew me. Like I could go to the corner store, the lady at the corner store knew me. I could go to the grocery store, the lady at the grocery store knew me. So to move into an environment that was completely foreign and to have my parents working all the time, I think it put me at a vulnerable position because some of the first people who introduced themselves to me in Maryland were definitely older than me. And I ran across some predators, to put it like plainly. And I had a spirit of discernment, but it wasn't as strong as it should have been for me to have been like out in the suburbs kind of like by myself. So that was definitely like a turning point and a moment where I really didn't know like what to do or how to function. And what I will say is that I really feel like my mom felt like she was making the best decision for what she needed to do for her family. And she was like, really proud that she had like bought her house. And my dad was really proud that they had got their house built. Like I said, both my parents had remarried and both my step parents had kids. And so we had this huge family, but I was still my mom and dad's only child. And I kind of toiled with that for a while because I always wondered like why they didn't give me a brother or sister, why they didn't give me somebody that was like my sibling. And it took me a long time, like really until I was in my 30s, to kind of go back in hindsight and say, okay, now I get it. Now I understand that like it wasn't best for them to be together at that time. But for me being a kid, and like nobody ever sat down and had that conversation with me. Like my parents never sat down and said like, hey, we didn't stay together because X, Y, and Z, or this is what was going on. I just was kind of like, I just kind of had to go along with the flow. So I learned how to be fluid, and I learned how to move amongst people, but I always still felt kind of like an outsider looking in with a lot of my with my immediate family. So that was one of those moments. And for a long time, like even amongst my siblings, I felt lost because on both sides of my family, even my siblings had pairs of siblings. So my stepfather had 3 kids by his first wife, and they all had the same mom and dad. And then when my dad married my stepmom, she had 2 kids, and they had the same mom and dad. So they were like paired up as far as siblings were concerned. And then both sets of my parents had children within their marriages, so they had children that belonged to their household. And I was still kind of like just Cretia, like the little like, and I would, they would be like, oh, you always doing too much or making yourself extra, and then um my mom would be like, you always want attention. And it's like, well, if I don't make noise, I'll just kind of like fade into the background as like one of nine. But I really didn't kind of like fit into the mold that all my other siblings fit into. And looking back on that now, I know that was God having favor over my life, because what it did was it helped me to be able to build relationships that were unconventional, and to be able to learn that all families don't look like the house and the white picket fence. And I realized at a very young age that I was like a bridge builder between people. And one of the reasons why a lot of my family still even have relationships to this day is because of me, because of the different entrepreneurial ventures that I've gone on, or some of the challenges that I've taken on, or even me becoming a mom and like needing my family to help me raise my kids. It was me who actually was like the medium point between the adults in my life that helped them to build bridges. So I thank God for it, but it was a very interesting being a teenager in like my circle with my family. It was hard. I ran away several times. So after my grandmother passed away, um, I became very rebellious against my mom and my dad, and I basically, anything they told me to do, I did the opposite. So if they said go to school, I went to my friend's house. If they said get good grades, I failed everything on purpose. Not because I wasn't intelligent, but like literally being oppositionally defiant. One, because at that time I didn't really realize that I was still grieving my grandmother, and I didn't really get a chance to like process everything. It was just like expected of me to just move on. So I did find myself crying a lot, looking for attention in all the wrong places. While my mom was away at work and I was off in the suburbs by myself, and or with people who I thought were my friends at the time, I started hanging out around some older guys. I think I was maybe like 13. I think it just turned 13 at the time. And like all these guys were like older teenagers, like in high school, just graduated from high school. So I started drinking, I started smoking, I started skipping school. And my parents were police officers, so this was like a no-no. Okay, like you didn't do drugs. That was a definite no. You definitely didn't skip school. You definitely didn't ride around with your friends that stole cars. Like anything that is going on today on Grand Theft Auto, I did Grand Theft Auto in real life. But literally, I just became like super, super rebellious, and I just really don't think that my parents knew what to do with me. They started seeking out, like they put me in therapy, but I still just didn't open up. I just stayed very closed. And I definitely looked to like drugs and alcohol to numb a lot of the pain that I was going through. And mental health wasn't a thing that we talked about then. It's fairly like a new issue that comes about in today's society, like mental health days, and like how you feel and what you're thinking wasn't as important as how you were acting. So a lot of times I would try to fake it, but I'm not really a fake person. So then I didn't care. And so I would just do stuff even if they knew. So when my mom found out that I was like drinking and smoking and hanging out with boys, one of the things that one time she took me and she put me in like this group home. And I was so mad with her. I was like, why would you give me away to strangers? And I ran away from there. I broke out of the group home. And I disappeared for like 4 or 5 days because I had, built relationships with like adults by then. And I was hanging out with a couple of my friends. And I remember like this girl that came over and was like, you are not supposed to be here. You are not old enough to be here, like hanging out with us. And she literally like made the guy who I was with take me home. And I just remember like going home and my mom just being like, of course she was worried. She was crying. And then I got there and I just remember thinking, you really didn't care because you gave me away to those people anyway. So a lot of torment with unresolved grief. I think my unresolved grief turned into depression. And I'm not the type of person that if I'm depressed, I'm really gonna like stay in the house. I'm like how they have like the fight or flight response. I'm the flight person. I don't freeze. I'm definitely gonna run. So I found myself like constantly running away from my parents. And they couldn't figure out what's wrong with me. They're like, you living in like, $500,000 houses, you got Jordans, you have, at the time it was Parasuco jeans, you got Parasucos, you have Apple Bottom, and like all of these designers, and and they just couldn't figure out like why they were doing so much to try to give me and my siblings a safe place. But I didn't feel safe because I really didn't have that bond and like that motherly connection with my parents, like that parental connection with them. And I think by the time that they tried to come along and make those connections, I was closed off. I had just shut down. And I thank God that now society really thinks about the mental health of teenagers. I thought about suicide a couple of times, but I was so scared of committing suicide because of something my grandmother told me. She said, if you kill yourself, there's no guarantee that you're going to get to talk to Jesus when it's done. And I was like, well, at least if I go out here and I don't commit suicide, like at least if something happens to me, like I didn't do it to myself intentionally. But yeah, it was hard. Dealing with unresolved grief, and really trying to navigate that as a teenager when your mind isn't completely formed. So I had my son. So still, pushing through, doing different things. I finally graduated. I graduated from high school. I got myself together, graduated from high school. And I met my son's father, and we were literally from the same neighborhood that I grew up with. So when I started dating him, it was so familiar. Like, we were from the same neighborhood, we spoke the same language, we went to the same elementary school together. And I got pregnant with my son, and I remember going to my stepmother, and saying to her, like, I'm pregnant. And she was like, okay, so, what are you going to do? How are you going to, what are your plans? And I was like, well, I'm definitely want to keep the baby, because I wanted somebody for like me to love. Because again, I felt like nobody really loved me. And after I had my son and I witnessed the power of God through like becoming a mother, I really started working hard to like turn my life around and not make such rash decisions. I still had a long way to go, but definitely becoming a mother, it brought back so many like memories of how my grandmother treated me, that I really wanted my son to feel that love. And I really wanted to bond with him from the very beginning. Like, I wanted to raise him. I wanted him to live with me. I knew how important grandmothers were too. So I made sure that he had a relationship with his grandmothers, his grandfathers, but I really tried to make sure that like no matter what he had going on, that he knew that I would show up and that like I was going to be there for him no matter what. And that was the pivotal moment, me becoming a mom. It was like when it was me and him. So I really started doing hair seriously. I was already a licensed cosmetologist when I had him, but I was in college. And I was like, nope, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to use this license that I got while I was in high school, and I'm going to use it to the best of my ability. So I've really started like sharpening my skills, like taking my clients seriously, showing up to work. And I just really wanted to be better for myself. I literally remember I was living at home with my parents. I didn't have to move. We had a huge house, but I wanted me and him to have our own house. So I went and got an apartment. So it was 2003. I went and got an apartment in Southeast DC in this high rise called Park Southern. And I got a 1-bedroom apartment, and my first rent was $498 a month for all utilities included. And I was so proud of myself because I didn't take anybody with me. And I like went and did the application and I got approved. And I remember going and telling my mom, I was like, Mom, I got an apartment. And she was like, where? And I was like, in Southeast. And I just remember she bust out crying. And I was like, what's wrong? Like, I got my own apartment. Like, I got a view of the city. I lived on the 5th floor. And when you looked out my balcony, you could see the monument. And like, you could see like this whole view of DC. And I was like, yes, like, I'm like, Mom, doing good. And she was like, I can't believe you're going to move my grandson to Southeast. And I was like, but Mom, I got my own apartment. Like, and that was kind of like when I was like, okay, Krisha, you're going to have to prove to everybody that you can do this. And I never really went back after that. Like, after I started paying my own bills and me and Larry lived together, me and little Larry, and his dad moved in with me as well. And we lived together. And I remember I got like, bought new furniture, painted my apartment. I had all of these like pictures on the wall. And I had a closet full of clothes. And my closet filled. And I remember the maintenance man, he came in my house and he was like, your house is really nice. And I was like, everybody's apartment doesn't look like this. And he was like, no, you got a really nice apartment. Like, you got some like actually furniture in here. And I was like, yeah. Like, that's the way like everybody's supposed to live. And he was like, at that point in time, I didn't realize how different my paradigm was from the people that had surrounded me. But I was literally like living in a luxury lifestyle while I was living in Southeast DC. I just stepped my game up. And so I remember going outside one day and I was driving a Volkswagen Passat. I just got a brand new Volkswagen Passat. I was going in my car. I had on a fur coat. Okay. And Larry was like, in his like little outfit or whatever. He had on like some like little dapper outfit. And I remember this guy in the hallway was like, who are you, the building manager? And I was like, no, I just live here. And then like as I started meeting people in the building and like moving around, I really realized that the way I wanted to live was a little bit different than the people who surrounded me. But having my son really matured me and made me like step up and to try to be the woman that I thought my grandmother would have wanted me to be. And I think that was one of the things that I always would be like, okay, if my grandmother could see me right now, like at this very moment, like how proud would she be of me? And, I did a lot of home cooked meals. I did a lot of reading and writing. And when we lived in DC, I made it my business to make sure that my son went to like the best schools that I could find. So just did a lot of like taking time to try to be a good mother. I think that was one of my pivotal moments. And not allowing other people's opinions of what I had going on negatively impact me as I became an adult and started venturing out on my own. I definitely started going to church. So shortly after I had Larry and I moved into the high rise, there was this big church that was next door called the Temple of Praise. And so we would get up every Sunday because you could hear the church. First of all, you could hear the church from the house because it was so big and it was so loud. And like you would look out the window and you would see like all these people streaming into the church. So I started going to church. So every Sunday, me and little Larry went to church because that's what my grandmother taught me. She taught me if you was going, be a respectable woman of God, that you had to show up in God's house. So I literally started going to church and I started meeting other people around me who were trying to do something out of the ordinary and trying to be extraordinary. The other thing about it is shortly after that, my mom was going to Spirit of Faith. And I remember her saying that like the church was opening up a salon. So I had my license and then I went and applied to work at the church and they hired me. And so I started working at Divine Design, which was Spirit of Faith's hair salon. And that just put me around some hairstylists that were like on a different level. Like I hadn't never seen like Black women churning out hair like this. And I remember going into the church salon and there's this one stylist, and shout out to Sharita Matthews. And I remember asking her like, Sharita, like, what are your slow days? And I remember her saying, I don't have slow days. And I was like, okay, that's how I'm going to be. I'm not going to have slow days. And I remember like sitting and watching them. And so one of the things that I felt like I started doing was like really trying to surround myself with like people who were doing or at least had some of the things that I wanted. And getting like people were my mentors. They didn't even know they were my mentors. Like I was looking up to them. They didn't even know it. But I literally was like, I'm going to be like this person. Or I remember seeing like the ladies at the church and they were married and they like had kids and like their husbands would go to church with them and I'd be like, I'm going to get a husband one day, not my kid's father, and we're going to go to church one day. But I just remember like trying to find people who were around me because like I said, this is in like the early 2000s, so like mentorship wasn't one of the things that was like talked about as much in our community, and mental health wasn't one of the things that was really talked about in our community. So it was like it was a combination of like go to college and get a good government job. And because I didn't choose to follow that path, I really think that I scared my parents and they thought that I was just going to be like a wayward soul wandering through the earth, dragging my kids along. My son at the time, dragging him along to just like whatever it is that I had going on. But literally, I was building a network and a foundation of people that now when I circle back around and they see me, they're like, yeah, Krisha, you did that. Yeah, like surrounded myself with people who really like were trying to do the right thing. I think that was one of the things that like really helped me. And even though like I would watch them from afar, because I was still wild. Like I would go to church on Sunday, and then like Sunday morning I would go to church, and then Sunday night I was at like the backyard show. Like yeah, like we're turning up. But I was kind of like, you know, still trying to figure out who I was because I had my son when I was 19. So throughout my life as like an adult, I found that I didn't realize how intelligent I was and how many ideas that I had, like how many things that I came up with. And the people that were around me would take advantage of that. So one of the lessons that I would say to anybody who's young, who is starting out, is to, number one, like really be mindful of who you surround yourself with. It's only by the grace of God that I'm still alive, because I was in so many situations where I could have been dead. I could give you an example. I was out hanging out with this guy. It was a snowstorm. We're riding around on 495 during the snowstorm. And his car goes to slide off the road. So we're just like sliding all over 495. And I'm like, as soon as the car starts sliding, I'm like, oh Lord God, please don't let me die in this car. Like, you know, I got a son, you know, I'm a mom. What am I doing out here? And I remember when we like slid over into the ditch, he was like, what was that prayer that you was saying? I started speaking in tongues, and he was like, what was that prayer you was saying? And I was like, I was praying for us. And he was like, I never even had a girl that prayed. And I was like, well, you're not going to have this girl no more either. Because I'm not supposed to be in this car with you. So I think, and then really just give yourself some grace. Because I always felt like I wasn't doing enough, which made me be really, really hard on myself when I had expectations of like how I felt like things were going to be, or, you know, expectations that other people had for me as well. Because like I said, I was in college when I got pregnant. So my mom and my dad were like really upset because I was in my third year of college. I was a junior and I should have been finishing school. And here I am now pregnant. And so to them, I pretty much strayed away from my path of going to college, getting a good job, like, you know, getting stability. But when I look back out on that now, and 20 years later, with all of the turmoil that's going on in the government, I'm so glad that I didn't do that. I'm so glad that I trusted myself and believed in myself enough to want to be an entrepreneur and to want to take risks on myself, because I felt like everybody I saw that was like betting on somebody else for their success was always disappointed. And it's like, at least if I don't succeed at my entrepreneurial endeavors, or at trying to, forge my own path, that at least I was making my own way, and I wasn't dependent on somebody else to make my path for me. And I know that my path is not something that everybody can do, but if you truly believe down deep in your heart that your purpose is to start a business, or to mentor other people, or to do something opposite than what your family thinks that you should be doing, that you really need to like sit down with God and try to like talk to Holy Spirit to try to figure out what God wants you to do. And I think a part of that rebellion that I had when I was a teenager was I didn't want to do what my parents wanted me to do. And I knew that from when I was a kid. I was like, I don't want to be a straight A student. I thought that was stupid growing up. And my parents were like, what do you mean? I'm like, listen, if I go to school and I spend all of my time and energy like just focused on academics, where is my creative outlet? Because I was an artist. Mind you, I said, when I was a kid, I was in theater and in dance and doing all types of like arts. And when I moved to Maryland, my mom didn't put me in any of those things. So when I got to high school, she had me in the science and tech program at my high school. And I unenrolled myself out of the program, forged her signature, and signed up for cosmetology. That's how much I didn't want to do what she wanted me to do. I'm not saying don't go out forging your parents' signatures, but literally I knew that I wanted to be an artist. I knew I wanted to work like directly with people. And when I would say those type of stuff to her, she would be like, no, you need to go to college. And I just wasn't having it. So we clashed and bumped heads a lot on that. So what am I still healing from today? I still think I have some unresolved grief. And so my mother's mother passed away when I was 12. And I had my father's mother until this year. So having my grandmother leave this earth brought back so many memories that I thought I was healed from. So many like feelings of like being deserted, feeling like I'm still one of one. Everybody else around me has like their pair, their brother or sister, their mom and their dad, like these like little these like little pockets of a family. And just really feeling like the people who really understood and knew me are gone now. And so that is something that I am still dealing with, like that unresolved grief. I set myself up, like I feel like I present as like this really like strong person on the outside. So kind of like I don't know, like one of those ice creams that's like chocolate on the outside, but like just only like vanilla on the inside, like just really like soft. That's me. My love language is like hugs and like spending time. And after my grandmother passed away, I didn't really get a lot of that. So I was seeking that in the wrong places, mainly from men. And so I allowed myself to be abused sexually, emotionally, mentally by men, like just seeking attention. So I do feel like there's some unresolved hurt that came from that, just knowing that I allow myself to be in some of those positions where I was abused. And I really didn't talk about it. So I think here on this episode is like the first time where I really talked about or I speak publicly about being sexually abused, like during high school, being in various places that my parents didn't know I was, being exposed to like different environments that created like a sense of devaluation as to who I was as a person. I remember this one time, it was like this guy who I really wanted to talk to, and he was like in a band. I finally got to like go out with him, and then we went on this date, and we went back to his house, and we had sex. And I remember him putting like $50 on the nightstand, like after we were done, and I was like, "Whoa, what did I just like? What did I set myself up for here?" I was like, I really felt like he liked me, and so just kind of like thinking about that and like rolling a lot of that back. I know that some of the childhood trauma I still carry with me. And that's something that I may never fully heal from, but I do know that there is power in talking about different things and verbally like putting them out there so that the enemy can't use that as a stronghold anymore. And so a lot of times I didn't tell anybody because like the questions were going to be like, what were you doing there? Why did you go over there? Why were you with this person? Instead of like really like looking into how I felt and what type of mental toll that took on me. So those are some of the things that I am still healing from and still learning how to navigate. But one of the things that I can say now is that I am consistently having those conversations with my children. And constantly checking in on them, checking in with them, like, hey, who are your friends? Like, I'm not going to pick your friends for you, but I do want to know, like, who they are. I want to know where you are. And we're going to talk about, like, good decision making, bad decision making, and all of those different things without them feeling like I'm judging them. Because one of the things that I felt like growing up is that my parents had a perfectionism problem. So they never talked to us about finances when the finances were good and when the finances were bad. We were children. We were meant to stay in a child's place. And so we weren't taught financial literacy. So I'm constantly talking to my children about the reality of money, like the reality of owning a home, the reality of owning different things, like what it takes to have those things. And I remember my mom came to me one time and was like, don't be burdening them kids with all of those bills. And I'm like, but one day, Ma, they're going to get these bills. And if I don't teach them, the world's going to teach them, and they're going to teach them wrong. So through the different things that I've gone through, I've just tried to be more transparent with my children as to some of the different things that have happened to me. And I've sat down, I've had these conversations with them like, hey, when I was your age, I got sexually assaulted thinking I was hanging out with people who were my friends. And my daughter was like, Mom, that might be a lot. But I really think like sharing those things with them and being transparent help to build our relationship and help them to be able to know they can come to me no matter what. So my non-negotiables are, number one, whoever is around me has to be okay with me sharing that I love God and that God is going to be the number one in my life. The other non-negotiable for me is that I love myself right after God. So I love myself no matter what. And I constantly like have to tell myself, like, Lakresha, you're beautiful, you're wise, you're strong, you are enough. And as long as you have God by your side, like, you can do whatever it is you put your mind to. My non-negotiable in business is there's not a no in business. There's just, you just haven't found your yes. So every time I've gone on a business venture, whether it's getting funding or finding a space, you always get like 4 or 5 no's before you get that yes. So always just seeking that yes. Another non-negotiable for me is like making sure that my children know and understand what I'm leaving for them and what building a legacy means. So they know that they have a trust that my businesses and my different assets are in that will be given to them when we pass away. So we constantly talk about finances so that it's not a scary thing that they come across when they become adults. And my last non-negotiable is I will never not be myself ever again. So I'll never like shrink or be ashamed of what I've gone through, but mainly like embracing it and taking the power away from the enemy to like kill what my past experiences have been, because they've made me who I've become today. So if you're watching this podcast and you're feeling lost, I want you to know that God absolutely loves you. God cares for you. He sent his son to die on the cross for you, and that Holy Spirit is still on this earth just waiting for you to ask so that you can be found. None of us are lost. We may just have gotten off of our path, but there's light at the end of every dark tunnel. And I'm a witness, I'm a testimony to that. I've been able to survive the unthinkable. I am a mother. I am a wife. And I'm a business owner of a multi-million-dollar business. And I didn't take the path that everybody else chose for me. I took the path that God laid out for me. So just never be scared to walk through those doors and pray without ceasing. That's what I would want to tell somebody who's feeling lost. God has not forgotten about you. So I want to thank everybody for coming sitting down with me. I know this episode, you guys probably thought you was going to hear about my business plan. I really wanted to give you some insight onto who I am and get a chance to see like who I am as a person, and just know that there is beauty in building every single thing, no matter if it's a business or a family or just building you. There's beauty in that, and don't ever let anybody take your shine away. I love you guys. Peace.
Let's go! Hey! Faith, family, future. We building big. Welcome to the Beauty and Building Podcast. Yeah. We go up when we step in. Yeah, we rise again. Turn the pressure into power. Let the light pour in. Hey, we ain't breaking, we break through. Everything we touch, yeah, is brand new. There's beauty, yeah. Beauty in the building. Woo! Lock and level up, let's build.